Now, what's odd is that an incident of government suppression actually would lead to an increase in religious toleration. And what I'm talking about here is the Tiananmen Square incident of 1989. In this incident, a large number of protesters gathered in Tiananmen Square in Beijing to call for democratic reforms in China. And the government, rather than meeting them halfway or negotiating with them, decided to suppress this movement. And you can see an iconic image from the suppression of this one lone demonstrator here facing down this column of tanks. So this democracy movement was brutally put down. I think several hundred people were killed in its suppression. And this led to foreign problems. China was criticized internationally for human rights abuses and attacked because of this action, which hurt its international prestige. And of course it also caused some domestic problems because people weren't very happy that the government had killed so many people who were engaged in protest. So what this led to then was actually greater toleration for religion. And this happened for throughout the 90s. And this happened for several reasons. One was the government realized it needed the support of religious people. Right? They're facing problems from these political demonstrators, people who want more democracy. If religious people were also to join them, eventually the protests could get so large that it could seriously challenge the communist government or even overthrow it. And specifically during this time, in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, religious organizations were playing an important role in overthrowing communist states. In particular, the Catholic Church played a key role in the overthrow of the communist regime in Poland. And the Chinese government realized this danger, realized that if it pushed religious people too far, they may decide that they would be better off with a new government. And so there was a necessity then to support religion, give it a little more toleration so that the religious people would in turn support the government. What's also key is economic development. At this time especially, China wanted to develop its economy so that it could deliver on the promises of prosperity that communism had made. But to do that you need investment. You need foreigners especially to invest in your country. And people aren't going to do that if you have a really bad human rights image, or if they're afraid that the government is too oppressive, that they may lose their investment. So in order to improve its image, to increase investment in its country, there was a realization, hey, we need to give a little more tolerance towards religion. And also what is key too was religion itself could play directly to this issue of investment, especially Taoist and Buddhist temples. Basically what would happen is overseas Chinese in the United States, Canada, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, or wherever, were interested in investing money to rebuild temples that had been destroyed or even expanding them. And of course this could bring local prosperity and assistance to the local economy, because some of these temple complexes were very large and they easily became centers of tourism. So by tolerating religion, that encouraged people to invest money in these local temples and so forth, which then helped build up the local economy itself. And of course people aren't willing to invest money in a temple or anything else if they're afraid that the government's going to destroy it. So this necessitated then by encouraging religious tolerance, they also encouraged investment. And this culminated in the 2001 statement by the government, which said two very interesting things about religion that showed a big change in its policy. One was that religion could be a force for stability, right? Previously it's kind of seen as a bad thing, as something that could divide the country, as something that could be used as an excuse for imperialism. But here it's being stated it can have a role for stability, which is something the government wants to promote. And also they stated that religion's going to be around for a long time. Gone is this idea that religion is just going to wither away very quickly on its own once we achieve true communism. So what this is saying then is that, hey, religious people, we recognize that you're good for society, that you're not going anywhere anytime soon, and we're going to give you tolerance if you play by the rules. Now the big issue here though is what happens if you're religious people that you have a problem with the rules. And a key example of this would be the Protestant house churches. There's an official patriotic Protestant church in China that represents only a small fraction of Chinese Christians. And one reason is because this patriotic church has to adjust Christian doctrine in accordance with communist doctrine. So, for example, Christians believe generally that in the second coming of Jesus Christ, that when he comes again, this will be the kind of the end of the world and the creation of a new one, where true justice and true goodness will be realized. Now, this is threatening to the communist state because it's too otherworldly, and it challenges communism's promise that it will bring true goodness and true justice through the establishment of a truly communist society. So if you want to interpret the Bible then with what you believe it says and without government interference in accordance with your conscience, you may have to leave this organization and join another religious organization, such as a Protestant house church. And the government knows such house churches exist and often gives them a kind of tolerance, but it's really a tolerance of indifference. They don't have really an official stance, and this puts them in an ambiguous situation. The people here, any moment, the police could come in and arrest them or seize their books or destroy their house or whatever. And so their situation is very insecure. And the tolerance that they enjoy, this tolerance of indifference, which is basically the government saying, well, we're not going to bother with you right now because you're not much of a threat, but we may change our mind later on, it just doesn't offer a lot of security, and it could be lost at any time. Now, the government can be somewhat safe in ignoring dissident religious groups such as Protestant house churches because they're not really connected that closely to any political movement. But there's two very important religions in China that cannot be ignored because they are easily connected to political and ethnic movements, in particular Tibetan Buddhism and Islam. And this is because not only are these religious organizations and religions, they're both connected to ethnicity. Most Tibetan Buddhists are Tibetans, and most Muslims are not Han Chinese. They're a variety of other ethnic groups. And both of these, and these various ethnic groups, often desire either greater autonomy or even complete independence from China, or at least large portions of these ethnic groups desire these goals. And so this is a serious issue because then religion becomes a way of organizing people, of uniting them against the communist government. And moreover, the Tibetan Buddhists and Muslims in China are generally concentrated in the southwest and northwest, which are very strategic areas that the government wants to keep under close control. So this leads to a lot of conflicts over religious organizations and protests and so forth, and it's really a challenge to the policy of religious tolerance. And in addition, it's interesting, so the government wants to be able to control these religions, but it can't go too far, it'll cause problems. So for example, the Chinese government is often criticized internationally because of its treatment of Tibetan Buddhists, and one reason is because of the charismatic leader of Tibet, Tibetan government exile, the Dalai Lama. And at the same time, so it can't push people too far on the Tibetan issue because this will hurt investment, hurt China's image abroad. And similarly, in regards to with Muslims, China is dependent on foreign oil, especially from the Middle East, and if it pushes Muslims too far, this can cause problems with Middle Eastern countries. And so this creates an interesting kind of dynamic where oftentimes, because these religions are connected to ethnicity and to political movements, the government sometimes gives them a lot of support in terms of money and financing and so forth, but at the same time does that in order to keep control of them and isn't afraid to use coercion also to keep them in control, but it can't go too far. So this is a major kind of issue and challenge to the policy of religious tolerance in China. Now what happens if you don't play by the rules? An example of this would be the new religion Falun Gong or Falun Dafa. And this religion draws upon many traditional Chinese religions such as Buddhism, Taoism, and folk religion. It also makes a lot of promises regarding health. There's the teachings that if you follow the practices of the religion, that you do the exercises and so forth, you will actually become a healthier person, and there are also claims it can help you to heal diseases and so forth. And also there's some apocalyptic ideas as well that go with the religion. That doesn't come up much in the English language materials. I think it's more in the Chinese language. Now, the government criticized Falun Gong because of these health claims as being pseudoscientific. And it would be in government media, such as newspapers and TV channels and so forth, TV news programs saying that this religion and its teachings on health are pseudoscientific. Now, the Falun Gong, rather than just accepting this criticism, actually launched protests in the mid-90s. So if a magazine would, or a TV show would criticize them, they would actually go to the offices of the magazine or TV channel and protest. And in April 1999, they launched a massive protest that was very disturbing to the government. And the reason it was so disturbing was basically there's a central government complex in Beijing. All of a sudden one morning, the government officials went to work, and there were thousands of Falun Gong protesters waiting for them. And they weren't doing anything violent or anything like that. They were very quiet, and they just were doing their exercises as a kind of silent protest against the government. And this was very disturbing to the government because it showed the organizational capability of this religion, right? It could organize these thousands of people to launch a protest without the government knowing about it. And it also showed that they had a strong will to oppose the government, even at risk to themselves. So this led in 1999, to the suppression of Falun Gong. It's an illegal organization in China. You can't to be a member of it is to break the law. And what's interesting is that the government, it had to face this problem. Okay, we officially allow religious freedom. How can we suppress a religion? Well, we do that by saying that it's not a religion at all. It's an evil cult. It's superstitious practices. It's not truly a religion. Now, this is problematic because every definition I know of religion, Falun Gong fulfills it. So it seems to me a little odd to call it an evil cult or superstitious practice. And this is in fact evidence that China, even though it has claims to follow religious freedom, it actually follows a policy of religious tolerance, right? It treats a religion, it doesn't give all religions equal rights. It treats them differently depending on their usefulness or threat to the state, right? Whereas it just puts up with Protestant house churches for the most part because they're not really a threat. It's very strict with Falun Gong because it's seen as a threat. And it's a threat so bad that the Chinese government is willing to endure bad press even to this day over its treatment of Falun Gong.